Okay, so Peter, why don't we start by you telling me a little bit about how you came to get into this shady business of sociology? Yeah.
I was I had a number of majors as an undergraduate, and I ultimately ended up in social work. And social work at the time was heavily psychoanalytic and Freudian. And my wife at the time was a sociology major, and she was taking a course from Tamatsu Shibatani. And from talking to her and hearing what she was doing, I became interested in the self, and I was attracted to symbolic interaction as a way of dealing with that which did not involve the id, ego, and superego. And so, and we had a master's group thesis in social work, and we were using the thematic apperception test on delinquents. And I was not very happy with that option, so I decided that, I decided that I wanted to go into sociology. I went to Tom Shibatani and talked to him about going to Berkeley because we were there.
Yeah.
And Tom said, "You don't want to come here now." He was obviously having tenure kinds of issues or political issues in the department. So I told him I was interested in the self, delinquency, and race relations. And he said, "Well, I can think of two places you can go. You can go to North Carolina and study with, I can't remember, Johnson, or you can go to Minnesota and study with Arnold Rose." And I took the latter option, and that's how I got into the business. There's an irony. When I was at Santa Barbara, the chair at the time was interested in trying to attract Arnold to come to Santa Barbara, and Tom, who had sent me off to study with him, did not want him as a colleague. So nothing happened there. But
that was kind of interesting because, I mean, both Shibatani and Rose, I mean, when I was first getting into business, they were kind of everyday names.
right.
Rose's collection, Human Behavior and Social Processes, was one of the sort of key introductory texts that
Exactly.
I was asked to work with, and yet both of them have somehow or other really kind of slipped out of the canon.
Rose in particular, although I think Shibatani gets more recognition in some places, and I think that I personally have been trying to keep his work, particularly on social worlds and the cybernetic approach.
I was writing about rumours and urban legends some years ago, and I mean, I remember discovering that he was almost like a missing link between the early 20th century French writers on crowd behaviour and the sort of modern urban folklorists. And there was this really nice piece of work that he'd done on rumour, which again had seemed to have somehow slipped from history.
Right. I think you're right. But I've recently been going back over some of Howie Becker's writings and Anselm Strauss and Adele. I think Adele Clark also has mentioned Shibatani's social worlds. And Clark McPhail, I think, was taken with the cybernetic piece that Tom did.
I mean, you said you kind of came into this through an interest in the self, but then, in a way, your career took much more of a turn towards an interest in organisations, and institutions.
I came out of a very political family. Both parents were members of the Communist Party. I've had some career options shut off because of that. I'd wanted to be a history teacher. But when I got to Iowa, that was my first job. I was asked, or maybe I even volunteered, to do a course on political sociology, and I started that course at Iowa, which led to, one, my finding that there was no interactionist literature that was for that. I mean, even Arnold's power structure book didn't use interactionism as his way of defining power. So I began to develop the idea of the symbolic interactionist analysis of politics. And that was helped by stumbling across Murray Edelman, who had, as a political scientist, had done symbolic uses of politics, and Walter Buckley, who had done his systems theory book, where he made a point of talking about power. So that led me into that area, and as I got in and got criticism or had discussion, I realized that there were pieces that were left out, asymmetric relations, and then the negotiated order, and then I got a grant to do a policy study in Missouri, and that was parallel to the presidential address at the Midwest on the interactionist study of social organization. And there had been a whole batch, as you know, of things in that. And so I kept trying to extend and expand what it was we were talking about. One of the funny stories is that one of the early gatherings we had of the early group at Greg Stone's house, Norm Denzin was running around complaining about the fact that Peter always is just talking about power. He was fit to be tied, and then Patricia Clough introduced him to Foucault, and he was gone. But so it's been an interesting kind of development for me to move increasingly into broader ways in which we might be using what we have learned and think about it, interactionism. I'm concerned, and I'll talk about that later this evening, that there appears, I mean, it's ironic, but there appears to be an emphasis on the self, at least as far as the organization is concerned, and I think that's, and if we go back to Mead and Strauss and so forth, we really need to be starting not with the self, but with the social act.
Well, absolutely. I mean, it's the sort of conventional inversion that you do in teaching undergraduates about Mead. You know, it's not mind, self, and society. It's society, self, and mind.
Yeah, I do it the other way. I do society, mind, and then self.
Yeah, but it is interesting. I mean, when I sort of first started 40 years ago, I mean, I was working with a research group that was full of young interactionist sociologists who were passionate about using this approach to study organisations in healthcare, in justice, in welfare. A sort of classic group of ethnographies by the folks who taught me.
Right.
You know, looking very much to, well, particularly the work of Strauss and his colleagues as a model. And somehow or other that tradition almost seems to have died out, or at least died out within symbolic interaction.
Right. I hope Patrick's article might stir up some renewed interest. I think some of the other things that, if we go back to those people who did that early work, they're no longer here.
Yes.
And the places where interactionism is developing is frequently not at research universities. And I think that trying to do the kind of thing that we did requires a larger research enterprise that might be available to.
But I think it's interesting the way in which the sort of ethnographic organisations has been taken up in the business schools, but really without any acknowledgement of its intellectual roots. And I sometimes feel, and I mean David Silverman has also said the same, that our work is more in demand by people who are now sociologists of organisations but call themselves org studies people and work in business schools and get paid a hell of a lot more.
Right. And I think that when I'm blocking on the names, but Fleegstein and McAdam have the strategic fields, and Fleegstein gets into some discussion of growing out of mead, but pays no attention. They don't look at our literature, or they're not aware of it. They seem to sort of go around. And of course, Maine's made this point in the fault lines, which is people are doing what we've done for a long time, but they're not connected to us in the way in which they're doing it. I mean, I think the field has become more sociology and social science and other disciplines has been done more processually and interactionally without necessarily being aware of what we are doing at this point.
So perhaps we can move on, Peter, and talk about this new project that you're doing for us at the Journal, this special issue on time and space, which I thought it was a very exciting idea when you brought it along, but maybe you'd like to say a bit more about what you're hoping to achieve with it.
Well, I have in previous pieces talked about the need to address this. I think we've done a good bit of work on temporality, but we've not done as much on spatiality. And I was really impressed and moved by this book, Now Here, that was edited by Dee Bowden and Roger Friedland at Santa Barbara. And it struck me as space and time are really basic, foundational of everything, and we pay little attention to that. On the other hand, the geographers have gone wild with taking sociological ideas and then I began reading, and so I stumbled or found things that were really fascinating to me, and I'm using that in terms of some work on natural gas extraction. And it occurred to me that it might be a good time to look for people who were working in space and time, but in fact we're not aware of the possibilities of interactionism or of the work that could be done. I discovered, much to my surprise, that there's a pragmatic theory approach in archaeology, which I don't. And the works of Barbara Adam and Doreen Massey in UK. So my hope was to bring the works of a number of people together in this issue. I would love for people to do space and time, but
I'm thinking there it would connect to something like the mobilities agenda that's come out of science and technology studies, and which really I think does try to dissolve that boundary in trying to think about those sorts of issues. And of course, a lot of that work, again, it has its roots in interactionism, in ethnomethodology, in things that are part of the family that we'll belong to.
And I've also found that anthropologists, I found a number of people who are doing social construction, of space and time. I've also found, I think it's a fascinating concept, spatial inequality, that was developed by a number of rural sociologists, which, and what I'm trying to do, and what I'm hopeful of, is much of the work that's been done, at least on space, has been urban.
Yeah.
And I'm hopeful that we will expand beyond that. And I think that the stuff that we're doing at my university on fracking is a way of getting at some of this, and it's a small town, middle size, and you get into the state and national politics and economics of the whole thing. So
yes, I mean, I think it's really interesting how the the rural sociology enterprise, with its very distinct history, in a way it's almost gone off into its own silo, and it's sort of dropped off the agenda. I mean, in the UK, hardly anybody does anything about
what has
morality.
What has happened to it in the U.S., which is interesting, is it's been connected with environmental sociology, or with sustainability and global climate change, and so that's the areas that they're working on now, as opposed to a number of things that they did before. And I'm finding environmental work being done across a wide range of places.
Well, I mean, let's hope we get some great papers here.
I hope so.
It sounds like a really important and challenging issue, Peter.
I've heard from a number of people who are interested in sending papers in, and I expect to at the banquet tonight and at my session tomorrow to tell people about the special issue, so maybe we'll get some articles out of that.
We'll be looking out for them. And thank you very much for talking to me.
Thank you. My pleasure.